Good morning. We'll be starting off in Matthew chapter 26 this morning. As we know, it's Palm Sunday today, but I was a cheater and preached on Palm Sunday last week. My hope was, since there's so much from Palm Sunday on through resurrection, I wanted to do what I did last week and then everything leading up to the resurrection this week and focus solely on that for Easter since it's Resurrection Sunday. But we're going to have to stretch this out because I didn't even make it to the cross this week. Got a lot happening in between there, and so next week we'll do the crucifixion and resurrection, but we've got more going on in between there. Last week we did leading up until the Pharisees had decided they wanted to crucify Jesus. They wanted to have him put to death, as they said, by trickery. And we know that Judas had betrayed them, and the stage was kind of set for things to go on from there. And today we're going to get into his arrest and his trial. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 26, starting at verse 36. And we're going to head to the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew 26:36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, a second time, he went away and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass from me, unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them and he went away again, and he prayed a third time, saying the same words. And he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise and let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Jesus knows what's coming. He knows what's coming. And when he says, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me," I don't think that cup that he wanted to pass from him was necessarily his death, his physical death alone. I think it was the fact that he was going to have to take on our penalty, the weight of our sin. He says, "Let this cup pass from me." What does a cup often signify in the Old Testament? It talks about the pouring out of God's wrath, the pouring out of justice. And we know that on the cross, a sinless Christ had the cup of our sins poured out on him. And I believe that's what he was distraught about. As we look at this, it reminds me of Jesus' humanity. We know that he was fully man and fully God, and that he is. Shouldn't say was. But honestly, a lot of times when I'm thinking about him, when I think of his mental state, his emotional state, and the kinds of thoughts that he has, I think of more the godly aspect of it. And we forget that he's also human. So he's going to experience some of the same feelings and emotions we have, some of the same concerns. He showed worry here. He showed anxiety and distress over this. God says that we're to fear not. He tells us we're not supposed to be fearful people. That's not what Jesus is doing here. Jesus is experiencing fear, but he's not embracing it. And that's the trick. We can't help but experience scary things. We can't help but experience scary thoughts at times. But it is our decision if we want to embrace that. Do I hold on to that, and do I let it take root in me? Do I dwell on it? Let it manifest into a bigger worry within me? Or do I do like Jesus and say, you know what? I'm not looking forward to this, but I'm gonna do your will, Lord. I'm gonna go through this. And you know, when he was faced with his fear, something else happened. In Luke, in the account of in Luke 22:43, says, then an angel, and it's at this moment, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. When we're going through things like that, God doesn't just leave us to fend for ourselves. In this case, he sent an angel to actually give Jesus strength and to help lift him up. But he does the same for us in so many ways. So we need to remember that, you know, we're going to face fears just as Jesus did, but we need to be careful not to embrace them, because then they just grow into something uglier. Verse 46 says, rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. He's not saying, let's get out of here. The guy that's betraying me is coming. They're heading to the betrayer. It's time for this to happen. He knows that the cross is coming soon, and he's heading to face things head on. Even though he just faced that fear, and he didn't embrace it, and he's standing up to it. Verse 47. And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude, with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one. Seize him. And immediately he went up to Jesus and said, greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. But Jesus said to him, friend, why have you come? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And suddenly, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. But Jesus said to him, put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen thus? In that hour, Jesus said to the multitudes, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. And all the disciples forsook him and fled. Verse 50 says, Jesus said to him, to Judas, friend, why have you come? Jesus knew his betrayer. We knew this from the last account at the Last Supper. He says, friend, why have you come? He wants Judas to think about what he's doing. Hey, buddy, what are you doing here? Why have you come? Luke 22:48 has more wording. It says, but Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? He wanted Judas to think about what he was doing, just as he did before. And we see that as the people came to get him, this mob came like they were getting some vicious criminal when they had sat peacefully with him so many times before. And one of the men, it's actually Peter, but doesn't say that here, takes out his sword and takes off the ear of one of the men. And Jesus said, you know, don't you think I can call my Father and he'll send more than 12 legions of angels? A legion of Roman soldiers, which is what they would have known at the time, was about 6,000 men. He's saying, don't you think my Father could send down 72,000 angels? He could send as many as he wanted, but this is a massive number. This paints the picture. Don't you think my Father could send down thousands and thousands, dozens of thousands of angels and take care of this? What is you cutting off this man's ear going to do to stop any of this? If we wanted this stopped, it could be stopped. But as he says, how then could the scriptures be fulfilled that it must happen thus? He knew it had to happen. And he says, those who live by the sword die by the sword, basically. And that doesn't mean that there's never a use for something like that. There's never a time for that, something like that, to defend yourself, whether it be by a sword or whatever. But prior to this event, prior to this setting, in the account in Luke, Jesus told them to get swords. He said, if you don't have one, sell your coat and go buy one. Because he knew the dangers that the men were going to face, and that they were going to need a way to defend themselves at times. So maybe the fact that they had just heard this resonated in Peter's mind and made him a little more quick on the draw. Jesus just told me to get a sword. I should make sure I have a sword. Maybe this is why. I'm going to defend him now. What's happening here is Jesus he's teaching the lesson that we need to choose our battles. This wasn't one that man needed to fight. This was God's battle to fight. And what may have looked to man like losing was going to be winning through God. But Jesus went on to face his accusers. Go to verse 57. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard. And he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Now look, you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered and said, "He is deserving of death." Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?" In verses 59 to 61, we see more of their tactics. They even said in the past, we need to have him put to death by trickery. We need to take him by night, because of the people who were just celebrating him at the triumphal entry on Palm Sunday. He knew that the crowds wouldn't have it if they openly took Jesus, so they knew they had to be deceptive. And here we see more of it. Verse 59, now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days." They were seeking lies. Let's see a little more background on this. From Mark chapter 14, 56 through 59, from the same account from the Gospel of Mark. "For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him again, saying, 'We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands.' But not even did their testimony agree. Their testimonies didn't agree, at least in part, because they were lying about what they were saying. Even the actual testimony they gave, once they finally did, oh yeah, we heard him say, this is the one thing they could come up with. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. They were trying to accuse him of threatening to tear down the temple. Now we know that he was talking about himself, his physical body. When his temple, his physical temple is destroyed, when he dies on the cross, it's going to be rebuilt in 3 days, resurrected the third day after that. But here's their testimony. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands. And what did he really say? Here's the actual account from John chapter 2, verse 19. Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, do you see how subtly they changed that? It sounds pretty similar. And if somebody just kind of heard it in the crowd, they might have thought, well, yeah, I think I heard him say something like that. They can't go back and watch the replay footage. They're being deceptive. He never said, I will destroy this temple. What he said was, destroy it and I'll build it back up. Verse 63, but Jesus kept silent as they accused him. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Exclamation point. He's getting angry. He's getting aggravated. He's getting angry. He's got this sham of a trial, intentionally having people lie under oath after taking him by deception. And even in their lives, they can't get their stories straight. They can't hang him up on anything. They're trying to get him convicted so they can take him to that cross. And what we see here is a trap. All the false allegations that failed, so now they're trying for some blasphemy entrapment. They're trying to get him to say whether he is the Son of God. Because they're just going to say, well, no, he's not, so it's blasphemy. They've taken every opportunity. Every time we see the Pharisees and Jesus, or the Sadducees and Jesus, they're trying to twist something and trap him up, and they fail miserably every single time. But what does it say he did? It says, but Jesus kept silent. And that was a fulfillment of prophecy from Isaiah chapter 53, verse 7. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, and yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. And he quotes prophecy. Not only did he just fulfill prophecy in verse 63, he quotes it in verse 64. It is as you said. He's not falling into their trap of getting tricked into wording something that they might be able to hang him up on. He's saying it is as you said. Like when Judas said, "Is it me that's going to betray you?" He's like, "Hey, you said it." But he says, "Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And that was Old Testament prophecy. Did he say, "I'm going to be doing these things"? Or did he say the Son of Man is going to be? We know it's him, but he worded it in a way that they shouldn't have been able to hang him up on it. But they're like, "Oh, hear that? This is blasphemy. What do you think? Let's have him put to death." Matthew chapter 27. I'm going to skip ahead to verse 1 there. We have the denial of Peter, which is a sermon in itself, so I'm going to move on to where Jesus is handed over to Pilate. Matthew 27, verse 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. See, it wasn't set up like our government is here. You've got the civil government, and then you've got the people. Here, Rome had, basically control of the world, at least mainly in that area at that time. So there were the Roman rulers. There was an emperor, there were governors and things like that. But to kind of, subcontract kind of the work out, I guess, not have to do quite as much on their end, they let the people keep some of their own leaders as well, but the Romans would lead over them. So the Jewish people had the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all them leading over them as their spiritual leaders and in their personal matters and things like that. But as far as government, we had the Roman government over them. So not only did Jesus have to face the people that he just faced, the Sanhedrin, which is made up of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, scribes, people like that, he's now got to face the civil government. He's getting handed over to Pilate, the governor. So he's got to be a part of this too. Move on down to verse 14, where we see his facing of Pilate. I'm sorry, verse 11. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. And Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. You notice this whole time they're asking Jesus, "Are you the Christ? Are you the Son of God?" When the religious leaders were asking him these things with the intent in their heart to entrap him, to trip him up, and to get him put to death. He didn't take the bait. He didn't fall for it. Now here's Pilate asking him the same question. "Are you the king of the Jews?" He says, "It is as you say." "Yes, I am." Why would he admit it to him but not the others? I think maybe it's because he knew that Pilate would believe him. He knew that he wasn't, as these religious leaders were, setting out to take Jesus down. Because he's answering him, and at the same time, he says, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. So he's answering Jesus, and at the same time, or he's answering Pilate, but at the same time, he's like, I don't want to hear what you guys had to say. I'm not falling for your nonsense. Well, he's not talking about, when it says while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. This isn't talking about that past facing of them, where he just was dealing with them a moment ago. They're there with him now, with Pilate. And in the account, in the Luke account, 23:2, we see what those accusations are. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Okay, so first off, they're being manipulative again. Oh, this guy's just out to pervert the nation. But that second one caught my eye too. It says he was forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar. Anybody remember him doing that? I remember a story where they tried to trick him into doing that and failed miserably. He said, they had him right in front of all the people, and they wanted him to say something that would get him in trouble. So they said, "Is it lawful to pay taxes?" Because they knew that they thought they had him trapped in that question. Is it lawful to pay taxes? Because they thought that was going to be a lose-lose for him. Either he can say, yes, it's lawful to pay taxes and please the government and not have anything he can be accused to people like Pilate for, but then he's going to have all the people upset with him because they were abused by the tax system. Or he can make the people happy and say, no, it's wrong to pay taxes. And then they can go to the governors or whoever and say, hey, he's telling the people they don't have to pay your taxes. They're trying to trip him up. They said, is it lawful to pay taxes? And he said, whose face is on this coin? Whose face is on this coin? And he said, it's Caesar's. And he said, render to God what is God's, and render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give God what belongs to him, what you owe to him, and give Caesar what you owe to him. This is just a hunk of metal. And now they're standing in front of Pilate, and they know they've got a weak case. They've got bad testimony that didn't match up about lies to this point. They say, well, he was forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar. You should have him put to death. He's telling the people they're not allowed to give you guys money. Just another pathetic attempt. Another lie. You know, they thought they could manipulate Pilate. In verse 12, it says, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. He wasn't even going to dignify it. He knew this was nonsense, and I think he also knew that Pilate could see right through it. Pilate said, in verse 13, and Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly. Why did Pilate marvel at this? What was such a big deal about this that made him marvel that Jesus kept quiet? Wouldn't you think he would think, this guy's crazy. He's not even sticking up for himself. But he was impressed by Jesus. Pilate knew they were lying. He knew Jesus was innocent. And yet, even when he was faced with death, he remained silent. He wouldn't dignify their accusations. He wasn't going to beg them to believe him. He wasn't being fooled into thinking that that was even a good option. Beg them to believe him. He knew they already believed him. They knew exactly who he was and what he was about. They didn't want the truth. They wanted him out of the way. Let's turn on to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23, beginning at verse 13. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers, the rulers, and the people, he said to them, you have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. This is the charge you've given me. We just saw what they said. He's trying to pervert the nation. He's trying to trick them, tell them they don't have to pay taxes. You brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, in having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him. And indeed, nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one of them at the feast. He's seen their testimonies. This man wasn't stupid. And honestly, I think if most people were watching the circus of a sham trial they were giving Jesus, they probably would have seen through it. Pilate saw through it. And he's saying, you know what? You guys might be trying to convict this guy, but I'm telling you right now, he didn't do this. It's obvious he didn't do this. So I'm going to chastise him a little bit and let him go. Give him a slap on the wrist. He can pay his fine or whatever it may be, and we're going to let him go. because it was a custom for them to release one of them at the feast. Verse 18. And they all cried out at once, saying, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, who has been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder." Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them. But they shouted, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." And then he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to do their will. How did the crowd so easily go from praise him to crucify him in a week? These are the same people that were taking the clothes off their backs and throwing it in dirt so the donkey he was riding on could walk on them. How did they go from showing him nothing but love and worship and adoration to wanting a murderer let out of jail just so they could kill him, just so they could have him put to death? What changed so quickly? Mark 15, verses 10 and 11. For he, Pilate, knew that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. He knew that he knew their motives. They were jealous of they wanted to hold power. They wanted him out of the way. They were jealous of him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd so that he should rather release Barabbas to them. They tried to manipulate their first trial. They've been manipulative in getting Jesus arrested in the first place. They tried to manipulate Pilate, and he saw right through it. So what did they do? They decided to go back to the crowd and manipulate them. They couldn't deceive Pilate. And one-on-one with the people in that crowd, they might not have been able to deceive them. But it's a lot easier to sway a crowd than it is a person. It's a lot easier to sway the masses than an individual. People tend to